Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. This is going to be a very quick version of the First Impressions podcast. I am Joel Erickson. I'm joined by Nate Atkins. We are both in the Atlanta airport waiting for our connecting flight to get home from Jacksonville to Indianapolis. As you know, I don't like to spend any extra time there if possible. So, that's what we did. We're going to just do it right away. We got to jump right into it. We got to go pretty fast here. We got about a half hour before we board. So, Nate, Colts lost today. We start with villain of the game.
Villain of the game. I mean, it's got to be someone on the defensive side of the ball, but it's kind of hard to pare this down. I mean, I'm going to have to just go with the Colts. I got to know where you're going to go with this, so just to make it a little bit different. I guess I'm going to go with the Colts cornerbacks. They started Jalen Jones and they played some Samuel Womack, but they played more Dallas Flowers than they've been playing because Samuel Womack was dealing with an illness, came down with an illness this weekend. So he played, and I noticed a couple good run stops from him, but they were using Dallas Flowers a lot more in coverage than we normally see, and that became a problem, as it's been a problem when he's had to play preseason practice or sparingly in the games because again, he's only a year out of the Achilles tear, and it took one play for Brian Thomas Jr., who is a super talented receiver, but he's a rookie. One play for him to go 85 yards on a double move to the end zone, just gave the Jaguars a touchdown in a single play. Just kind of roasting Dallas Flowers, and the Colts corners just kind of gave up those plays time and again. Now they didn't get much help from the pass rush the way that this is built for, and I'm sure that'll you'll touch on that in your answer a little bit. But specifically to the cornerbacks, it's just this has been a ticking time bomb for this with this group for a while. If you think about the way it started, week one they go up against the Houston Texans, C.J. Stroud. It's a horrible matchup, but they threw everything into defending the pass, gave up a bunch of runs. Still got had a little bit, but they weren't maybe they weren't the villain that day. But since then, they've gotten to play Malik Willis. They got to play Caleb Williams in one of his first starts, and they got to play the Pittsburgh Steelers, who never really lighted up. So, but it's been trending this way. Justin Fields last week set a Steelers franchise record for kind of his combined passing and rushing in a single game. And today, Trevor Lawrence goes out and sets a career mark for passing yards and yards per attempt. He had 371 yards, 10.9 yards per attempt. Those are the most he's ever had. And this is not exactly a surging Trevor Lawrence. This is kind of him at his worst spot. He's lost 9 starts in a row, and the receivers are fine, I think, but they're not. They should be torching them the way that they torched them. And you had an 85-yard play from Brian Thomas Jr. You had a 61-yard play from Christian Kirk, and it just sort of got at all of them. Chris Lamons is clearly not Kenny Moore. I mean, he got toasted by Christian Kirk on some plays, and then Jalen Jones. He makes some plays, so he'll make some back, but he continues to give up a lot of chunk gains as he's terrified of giving up the deep ball. And then, like I said, Dallas Flowers just not hanging in there. So this became a game where the Jaguars wanted to go after that pass defense. Not many teams have really been equipped to do that yet, and they torched them through the air. So they're my villain of the game.
Yeah, my villain of the game is going to be Laiatu Latu. As always, like he was really emotional after the game. You don't want to say that about a player, but he feels the pressure. But they drafted him to take this pass rush to the next level. No sacks, no quarterback hits today. The pass rush, because of injury, is kind of down to just him and Diallo Degbo. They had Tommy Wadabare and Isaiah Land in their third down rush today. But he was drafted to take this defense to the next level, and even with Buckner and Lewis and Pay out, he's supposed to be good enough to do it. So for me, that's going to be my villain of the game. Let's go to unsung villain of the game. I'm just going to jump mine really quick here with Chris Ballard. Part of the reason that they're in that situation at cornerback is because Ballard decided to rely on injury-prone or coming off of injury cornerbacks, like you mentioned. Dallas Flowers is coming off of a torn Achilles tendon. It was never reasonable to expect. It was probably always reasonable to expect that he was going to have some issues. And so I think Gus Bradley can go in here. Maybe that's going to be yours as well. But also I feel like they're not working with a lot. That for somebody who cries for depth as much as Ballard does, the defense doesn't have it in the secondary.
Yeah, I guess I'll go with Gus Bradley, even though I think it's more on Chris Ballard right now because today was a test of that depth and it was bad. So I don't think that Gus had a lot to work with. I know a lot of people want him to blitz. They don't really have that. Kenny Moore's the guy you'd like to blitz, but I'm going to put Gus Bradley here just because I do think this is a game though where when they are lacking in players, like that's where that scheme gets exposed a little bit more. He's known as a coordinator that doesn't switch stuff up a lot, and when you have really good players and they can play with continuity and those players win the day, that can be a very effective group as we saw it at its peak with the Seahawks. But when the players are a step below, there's just not a lot of compensation for it. I just don't think they were doing much to confuse Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has just always kind of had Gus Bradley's number specifically, just in terms of they just never make throws very difficult for him. And again, today you can put a lot of that on the lack of pass rushers, but I think some of that is also going to go to the way that they play in the secondary, where normally, ideally, he has a bump and run type of system on the outside. They've been playing farther off every time they play the Jaguars. It's like they're trying to prevent against the deep ball, and they just get diced up in the completion percentage. So it's one of these where like 2 straight weeks, quarterbacks are setting franchise records. So while he doesn't have a lot to work with, when it's that extreme in the results, I think he has to wear some of this too.
Yeah, as normal, we would kind of unpack these a little bit more, but as we mentioned, we're trying to watch the clock here and make sure we don't miss our flight home. No one wants to stay in Jacksonville any longer than they have to. Hero of the game for you, Nate, today.
Well, I know where you're going to go with this, and I'll kind of leave that for you because I think there's a very obvious one. But I think the guy who deserves to be in this conversation is Joe Flacco. It wasn't a perfect game for Joe. There were stretches in the middle that were, I think you even said the press box kind of reminiscent of Gardner Minshew in the way that it was just incredibly dink and dunk, and that was what the Jaguars wanted to do, and that was what he was doing. So it wasn't like he lit it up. But again, he's a backup quarterback stepping in, and for that he played rather well. His stat line was great: 33 of 44, 359 yards, 8.2 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, no picks. 121 rating. Again, I think it's built on a few explosive plays, and the Jaguars are not exactly the best defense. But in terms of what he needed to do when he went out there, like the only reason they were in this game is because of some of these explosive. Well, the way they started with a surgical drive where he was like 7 of 7 to get a 7-0 lead, and then those explosive plays at the end. And you got to have someone who has the arm strength and the willingness to go take those shots, which they haven't had for a couple of years when it's not been Anthony Richardson. So I thought in terms of stepping in and being a backup quarterback who could not kill the team, but actually kind of help play into it and help give them a chance, I thought Joe did his job.
Yeah, Joe Flacco was actually pretty good. No turnovers. That was something that was a problem even for him during the Browns days last year.
Just one turnover, but yeah.
Oh, the fumble. That's right. No interception. Yeah. That's what I meant. Mm-hmm. But my hero of the game is the obvious one. The reason I get to take this one is because I feel like I defended him more than anybody else the first 2 years, and just Alec Pierce. We're at the point. This is what I wrote for off of today. We've got 2 things coming out. One's on the defense and its lack of available answers without those guys coming back off injury. But the other one is on Pierce and just. This is a guy who needs to get the ball. You can't get to the last 5 minutes of the game without Pierce getting a target, because right now he's making plays, a ton of plays with it. He got 3 chances today. He made a ridiculous 24-yard catch that was one-handed. That was a one-handed tap to himself. The very next play, he beats 2 guys deep and makes a diving catch at the end zone for 45 yards to set up a touchdown. And then the very next series, he runs away from the secondary for a 65-yard score. He's averaging 28 yards per reception this season. He's got almost 400 yards on just 13 catches. He's been incredible. And really, I mean, I would include Jonathan Taylor in this. I think he's been the most consistent, explosive player on the offense. Taylor's been really good, but in terms of explosiveness, if you go to Pierce, you're getting big plays.
Yeah, Alec is definitely the number one hero because he when he wasn't producing, that was because the Jaguars were determined to take that away. So he's at that level now where he's helped dictating the coverage that he's seeing, and yet still finding a way by the end of the game to stay focused and locked in. And when the moments are there, deliver with some huge plays.
Yep, that moves us on to unsung hero of the game. The unsung hero of the game. I'm
I feel like there are not a lot of candidates for this.
I
Uh,
I was gonna
ahead.
go with Mo Alley Cox. Just for that, like that was the kind of he didn't make the second play, I know that, but the first play, that's the kind of play we haven't seen him make a lot. It's the kind of play he's supposed to make, the jump ball. They haven't gotten many plays from the tight ends, and they really needed that to even have a shot to have Alec Pierce get them back in the game. Plus, just what he's done in the blocking, they somehow ended up with 5.5 yards per carry today, despite looking pretty bad for most of that. Some of that was your boy Joe Flacco rushing for 21 yards on a scramble. Didn't have that coming up. But Ali Cox has played a lot of snaps because he's good at blocking. Great catch today. I'll throw out Mo Ali Cox in there.
Yeah, that was definitely outside of Alec Pierce the best play that they had at 3rd and 15. I mean, they were going to get waxed until that moment. So that's a good choice actually. I'm going to go with Josh Downs. Not a flashy day for him, but 9 catches, 69 yards. That's exactly what I think Josh Downs is going to often deliver. And if you actually extrapolate that out over the course of the season, that's like an 1,100-yard season. So if you have that sort of chain mover type of player with the explosiveness of an Alec Pierce down the field, like this can work pretty well in the passing game. So he turned in 9 catches on 12 targets. A couple of just very nifty plays settling into. They faced a ton of zone. I thought he did the best job of settling into those zones. Had a nice one-handed catch. Had a couple of chunk plays across the middle, and I think it wasn't quite as flashy as last week's, but this is kind of like closer to Josh's floor, maybe a step above it. But this is what they needed so badly to be able to extend drives early in the season when he wasn't out there. So it definitely flew under the radar, but on a day like today. But I thought he was really solid.
Yep. That like I said, we're rushing through this. We are already to the number of the day. Number of the day as we try to make sure we make our flight. I know Nate's got a good one here. I'm gonna let him roll.
Yep, it's 8.7. That's the yards per play that the Jacksonville Jaguars had today. That's actually not as bad as it was until the Jaguars ran a couple plays just to kind of center the field goal attempt. It was over 10 for most of the day. I kept checking that number because I was so shocked, and it was a pretty even distribution for most of it. So 8.7 yards per play. That's I'm trying to remember. I saw a stat somewhere that's like the Jaguars' best in like 5 years. It's not a number that you should really see in an NFL game because it's 1.3 yards off of a first down every play that they're out there. So that kind of summed up to me just kind of as time went on, kind of how helpless this defense was.
Yeah, my number of the day here is going to be just 497. That's the yardage for the Jaguars. The Colts were already 32nd in the NFL in defense in terms of yardage, giving up 399-ish yards coming into it. They give up 497 today. Yeah, we can talk about a lot of the quarterback stuff, but like, man, that's pretty bad. And the run game actually looked okay until there was a 65-yard run and a 19-yard run. But like sometimes you say that and you go, well, outside of that, they were pretty good. This time it's like those two plays just kind of destroyed everything that they had. Let's get into the game day observation. This is my chance to crap out Jacksonville. They need a new stadium, Nate. There were leaks everywhere. And I'm not saying like leaks from like people talking to reporters, like actual leaking water. They need a new stadium.
Yeah, I got leaked on a couple times, so that'll play into mine a little bit. My game day observation is, holy crap, did it rain? And especially whenever we had to go to and from the car. And then when the game happened, there was like no rain, and it was like I just remember us getting there, and I didn't buy an umbrella because when we left the hotel, it was like, oh, it's a little overcast, then just torrential downpour. And so I walk in there and I'm looking soaked and I have to dry off during the game. And then it's like, okay, well, it went away. And then when we go back out there to rush to the airport, it's just raining cats and dogs, and trying to navigate through that to get to the airport was a little hectic. So it's like, this is what they call the calm before the storm, because there's another hurricane coming through this area on Wednesday. So I was like, if this is the pre-storm, I don't want to know what that storm's going to be like. So that was it was a weird day in that way, the way that it often is in Jacksonville.
Yes, and by weird he means bad. Moving on, 3 football things that gave me joy and 3 football things that left Nate terribly vexed. Number 1 football thing that gave me joy, the A.D. Mitchell throwback screen to Tyler Goodson. One of the chief reasons that I like this. So apparently it turned out, this is important. Nate got this piece of information for us. He was not looking at Alec Pierce. Pierce wasn't an option. It's a screen the whole way. But he looked off the receiver, which is great. And then to have, I like trick plays where there's more than just, you're relying on more than just the trickery. And in this case, relying on more than just the trickery is having the whole offensive line over there to caravan for Goodson. So that's number 1, the trick play, football thing that gave me joy.
Yeah, that trick play was a lot of fun. First football thing that left me terribly vexed was the taunting penalty on Josh Downs. Josh Downs gets a first down early in the game, and he kind of does this motion that's sort of like he's shooting a gun, but it's quick and it's super subtle, and it's really more of like a first down marker in his way of like loading up a gun. And they throw a flag, and he's just baffled by it. Like his reaction was like, "You've got to be freaking kidding me!" And it's just one of those things where like I get that you don't want players to be over the top with that specific type of celebration. I guess there was one in the South Carolina game that there's some clips going around the internet that was way worse than that they didn't flag at the college level. But it's just another thing. Like, every week, one of these vexings is going to be one of these unnecessary penalties. I feel like, because it's too much right now. It's too much to be flagging guys who show a little bit of, oh God forbid, passion or energy in the game, and then God forbid they also they'll fine them later in the week for things like this, just like they did to Isaiah Lance. So come on, let guys enjoy things, and when it's over the top, you can flag it. When it's that subtle and normal, keep the flag in your pocket. Let's move on.
Number 2 football thing that gave me joy, Alec Pierce's tap. Just loved it. Tapped it to himself like a basketball player. He said volleyball, although in volleyball you're not supposed to catch it. So,
that's right.
Yeah, great play by Pierce.
Yeah, that I thought that play just showed you kind of how locked in he is. That like he can go an entire game basically cold and keep back up with a play as natural as that. My number 2 football thing that gave me joy, or that left me terribly vexed. Unfortunately, you end up having to get critical of Colts players with some of these, but I'm going to point out that A.D. Mitchell's playing with some gator arms right now. That's become pretty consistent, and when it's a play down the sideline that's hard to get to against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are notorious headhunters, maybe it's understandable. But there was one play here today where he kind of kept his body still and just stuck out one arm toward the ball, and like all of a sudden that stuff is going to be on tape now. So opponents are going to see that. They're going to try and hit him. They're going to get in his head. Yeah, he's choosing to play this game. You got to find a way to play physically and go after the catch. And so this is also kind of a tough look when guys are giving their all in other phases to have that out there. So it's something he's got to correct.
Number 3 football thing that gave me joy is I think our plane is boarding. It's boarding faster than I thought it was. It is going to be number 3 football thing is Trevor Stewart jumping the snap. It's fun. I like it. I enjoy it.
Yeah. I don't know that I have another clear vexing, except I'll just say whenever I've used this before, but the pre-snap penalty out of a timeout. For some reason, Quentin Nelson is doing more of those this year than I remember. But every time I see it, it's just like, look, we're gonna have mistakes. We can't have those mistakes, guys. So it's another element of like going down to Jacksonville just kind of unravels people.
There was a little brief break in there for you guys, but for us, a very large break because we couldn't quite finish the pod before we got on a plane. So we are now finishing the pod at Indianapolis International Airport, making this maybe the first multiple city podcast for both of us.
Yeah, I think so.
Unless you count one of those pods that we do, which I think we have to do next week, actually, when we're driving back from Tennessee, and we end up. I still haven't figured out how we're going to do that one yet with the new computer system.
Yeah, that's the multi-small town one. Just driving.
Yeah, there you go. That's true. Because we usually start it in Nashville, and we're usually done before we get to anywhere of significance in Kentucky. I'm not even sure what part of that just paused because it started back up again. Okay, well, I'll just have to tell Clark. Anyway, so we're getting into the big picture stuff here, the stuff that's trying to remember, stuff that we're going to be talking about quite a bit. We're in too much blame, too little blame. The Colts lost today. Nate, who is getting too much blame for today's Colts loss in Jacksonville?
Too much blame. I'm going to say the injuries.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So Colts were down 6 starters on defense. That's significant. As we know, they were without Anthony Richardson and Ryan Kelly and Jonathan Taylor. It's a long list. It's a lot to go through. It's worth pointing out and talking about, but still not an excuse to go to Jacksonville again and lose for the 10th time in a row against a winless Jaguars team. And specific to the defense, it's not a situation where you can sit here and think that if they had some of those guys back, that they have gone from a unit that allowed 497 yards to something above average. Maybe if they had every player back, but that's never how it works in the middle of the season. Every team's without some guys. Jalen Jones said that today pretty well when he made a comment about how, I know he was talking about how it's tough to deal with these, but ultimately nobody cares who you have on Sunday. You have to find a way to get it done, and they're not getting it done. And the Jaguars were not without people as well. They had a couple of defenders who were not out there. They were without Evan Ingram, who was finished like 4th in the league in receptions last year. So every team's dealing with some stuff. The Colts are dealing with more. But again, though, this is exactly why we said all offseason they needed to add depth, is because you will have injuries. You don't expect to have 6 starters out, by week 5 on defense, but you're going to have some injuries. And whether they had 3 starters out or not, they're still at a point when they're playing guys that frankly have not really proven anything or don't have it physically, like Dallas Flowers. So we're talking about the injuries more because it's exposing the problems that were under the surface all along. And they've got to brace for injuries. I know. And the thing is, they did it at the quarterback position, and that's what kept them in the game. If they'd extended that same logic to running back and cornerback, they probably win this game, to be honest with you. So I think the injuries are getting a little bit too much blame versus the lack of a plan for potential injuries when some are going to come each season.
That's a really good one. I like that one so much that I feel like I can't really match it. I think if I'm going to throw too much blame here, at least not at 12:30 in the morning, I can't. I don't know if I can match that. The injury's getting too much blame. Well, I think I might go Shane Steichen. There were some timeout decisions. He gave the ball back to them at the end of the first half by trying to go for points. I don't know. I think I've said it on this podcast before. I tend to like an aggressive coach trying to get points, especially it turned out in this game that they needed as many points as possible the way the defense was going to end up playing. And I don't know. Braden Smith, I think probably, and Joe Flacco are probably more to blame for them giving up that field goal at the end of the first half. You've got to you you still got to block guys and do stuff. I don't know. I just didn't think that this is like a game. I saw a lot of stuff too about Steichen's play calling and stuff like that. They scored 34 points. Had a crap ton of yards too. It was like 400 yards. I don't know. It's hard for me to put this one on Shane as much as it goes on some of the other guys.
Yeah, I think the only thing with Shane that I'd have to go back and just review it more, but not taking the timeouts at the end of the game was interesting. And I asked him about that, and he explained that it was a matter of they wanted to wait until the Jaguars got to the 40 or the 45 to do it. And I wish he'd one of many things I wish he'd get into more detail on. I'm sure there was a reasoning behind it. It just was a little hard to square because like Joe Flacco came out right after that and said, this is a game you wanted to have the ball last. You wanted to have the ball with time on the clock, and it felt like that was the one thing with Shane that I thought he could have helped him out a little bit more with. But like the rest of it, I thought he was a key reason as to why they were in this game. Is they had to pull some things out aggressively to make up for the lack of personnel. The trick play to Tyler Goodson was just a wonderful design, that got them 3 points. They weren't able to finish that with a touchdown, but like that was a way to generate a big play when the full Jaguars plan was to take away all the explosives. So I thought they called the game that was out there for them, and they scored 34 points with a backup quarterback and a backup running back. So Shane actually gave them an edge for most of the game. Just the management at the end was a little curious.
Yeah. And then so that brings us to too little blame. Who's getting too little blame for this Colts loss today? Oddly, I think Chris Ballard.
I was just thinking that.
My timeline is and this is justified. Gus Bradley is not doing a good job here. The numbers don't justify what he's doing. But Chris Ballard, we said this. I saw you had a tweet about this earlier. Like the time to address some of these secondary issues was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
The lack of depth in the secondary is something that we've pretty much everyone has talked about all off season. And I think the defensive line, as much as I don't know that Taven Bryan is somebody that I think that you had to bring back or whatever, like they've it's really hard to predict Ebicom, Lewis, Pay, and Buckner all being down in the first 2 months of the season. That is the one position I think that has been really hit hard by injury. But the secondary, like we took the secondary, you could see this coming. There were guys that the guys that are injured right now. Brents is injury prone. You mentioned several times that Kenny's missed 5 games a couple times in his career. Not that he's been not durable. I think Kenny's been fairly durable, but he does miss time every once in a while. And so this is something that we all saw coming, and it's killing them. I was thinking back on the game while we were on one of these planes, and just how easy it is for teams. They tried to run like pass rush wise. They don't necessarily blitz, but they tried to run a lot of stunts in games with Odengbo and Latu today. Couldn't do it because every time they ran one of those, the ball was out of their hands to a wide open receiver. Lawrence's hands to a wide open receiver really fast. Like, yeah. I would prefer to watch a blitzing defense, I think, in general. But I don't know how you do it with this team. I don't know who I trust to cover anybody consistently enough to raise the blitzing. That's on Ballard. He said at the end of last season that they had to be better in the secondary to give Gus more options. They didn't do that. They gave him the same options, and some of those options got hurt again. He's got to take a bunch of the blame for this defense. And Gus Bradley obviously too, but the defense has always kind of been Chris Ballard's baby, and they're just not deep enough there in pretty much any sense of the word.
Yeah, we have to remember that like Shane Steichen did choose to keep Gus Bradley, and that's ultimately his decision. but he inherited him, and I know there's a narrative that like it was Shane's it was Shane's decision to inherit him and keep him. He could have hired somebody else the way they did at special teams coordinator, but that still goes to your point about how that's Chris Ballard's baby. He's been drafting and developing for this defensive coordinator for 3 years now, and they're dead last in defense by a mile. They're dead last in a lot of these categories, and the injuries are just not enough to explain that. When I don't even think the offenses they faced have been all that scary. You faced, the Texans are pretty tough. Since then, you faced the Malik Willis Packers, Caleb Williams in one of his first games, the Steelers, who don't put up 20 points on anybody other than the Colts, and the Jaguars, who were a winless team in a disastrous offense. So I think they've had it easy.
Good point.
And they've had it easy so far, and they're getting bombed, and that's an indictment.
That's a good point.
General manager in his 8th year. So I'm just going to double up on that. And the one other area I'd throw in there that he should have addressed was running back, because Jonathan Taylor has missed 10 games to injury the past 2 years, and they wanted to use him a lot and ride him, and I agreed with all that, but they knew how much the backup to Jonathan was so important last year with Zach Moss. Lose him, it just ran back the guys behind them. And today, Tyler Goodson had a nice 17-yard run, but Trey Sermon was 10 carries of 30 for 38 yards, and they threw to him a lot because that's what basically Jaguars were giving the free passes to him, and he did it okay there, but 6 catches, 25 yards. Like, they just couldn't really take advantage of that situation enough where the Jaguars are in the too high shell. That's where you should be able to run a lot on teams, and they couldn't do it. And I think when they had that 4th and 1 in the first half and chose not to go for it, if they have a Zach Moss in the backfield, I think Shane probably does go for it. So that's another position where we're talking about it now, but we were talking about it 6 months ago. So I'm just going to double up on
maybe longer than that. Maybe longer. It might be longer than 6 months, because I think with Moss we could see it coming that he wasn't going to want to be back to be Jonathan Taylor's backup. I feel like we probably talked about that fairly early. Trey Sermon, he's just not explosive. 3.3 yards per carry so far, 4.6 per pass. Like, people were asking me at halftime and asked Joel, that I do on X Twitter, if I would rather have Goodson or Sermon at running back, and I said Goodson. And but the other thing is, like, some of their running today, the 2 17-yard carries they have, which is a big chunk of the running back running game, that was all draws. That was Shane Steichen's run. That wasn't as much as it was the running back's run, So I'm with you. The backup running back's got to be thrown in there as well. That brings us to the last.
I was just going to say, I totally agree about, like, the defensive line. I don't blame them for, because in fact, I think they went a little too hard there, making everything about that defensive line. But the fact that the depth there isn't great at the point when you lose like 4 of your top 6 guys, that's not their fault at all. It's the problems that we could see coming. That's where you have to be fair about it. Is you do get dealt a tough hands sometimes, and the defensive line has got that. But running back and cornerback, especially, like, we could have seen these depth issues coming from a mile away with starters who have injury histories, guys you're counting on a lot, in positions where you need to have multiple options. And this is just what they rolled forward with, and this is kind of the bed they made.
Yeah. That brings us to the last 2 categories. These are the ones that we want you to take away. We'll start with one to throw away, as always. Something that people are talking about right now that is not going to be an issue the rest of the season isn't going to be something they're talking about the rest of the season.
Well, I wish I could say it's something they wouldn't be talking about, but I think something that's not going to be real and super relevant is the conversation to make Joe Flacco the starter. And I hope this doesn't become a broken record where we just say the same one every single week, because I feel like I used this last week, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago, but it's Joe Flacco again played. I know his stat line is great today, but what he did today was execute at a high level for a backup quarterback, which is valuable, very valuable when you have a quarterback who gets hurt at the rate that Anthony Richardson does. But like the argument that I've seen out there about why Joe Flacco should start is that and this is different than last year's Minshew. I do agree with this, is that he probably gives them a better chance to win a game right now going into next week. That's probably true. But this team's not going to the playoffs with the 32nd ranked defense, guys. Like, a lot has to change on this team for this to become the type of team that you can even think that way about. And even if you could, again, what's more important, gunning for a wild card spot or answering the most important position, developing the most important position that's haunted this franchise as it's leaned on those stopgap players. You go back to 2020 with Phil, and take nothing away from what Philip Rivers did then. It was excellent. But if you'd asked back then, would you rather have a 1-year run with an old quarterback or be able to say we solved our franchise quarterback dilemma and have him and it's solidified? It would have been the second one, because it's about creating something for the long term. That's ultimately what they made the whole season about, not bringing in any players. So Joe Flacco is here to just back up that other player because he gets hurt a lot. But the only way that I think I'll back off this and flip is if it really feels like Anthony Richardson is developing bad habits out there and has to be sat down, a la Bryce Young. But like you pointed out, when you're at that point, you're basically saying you're giving up on somebody. And so we are not even – that's just not something I want to entertain. So I feel like we're probably going to say this a few different times this season, because Joe has that ability to step in and play pretty well. And when you compare his passing numbers to Anthony Richardson's, it is going to look like he's the better player. And maybe he is right now, but that's not what the focus of the season can be. It's not what it was supposed to be. And I don't think it's what it's going to be. We have yet to ask Shane Steichen about this, because I just think he would stare at us and be confused, because the whole thing about hiring him as a head coach was to develop a quarterback they draft. And the whole reason they drafted Anthony Richardson, despite 13 starts, was they wanted to shoot for the upside and spend multiple years developing him. So we're 8 games into that process, and I think it's fair to just be happy for Joe Flacco, the backup, rather than make him something more than that.
Yeah, one of the other things I think that's important to note in the discussion of how he played today, that's like the worst secondary in football.
Oh, yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah.
Jaguars are not good on defense, pass defense. I think that's another piece of it that needs to be. Richardson has played much tougher defenses so far than Flacco. Well, then Flacco played the Steelers, but in that game, they were more explosive and a better offense when Anthony was on the field. So I think that's part of it. And I also, just to piggyback off of your thing here a little bit, people always say oh, well, you can just sit him and it's fine. That's not really how it works. Like, if you sit him now after making him the starter to start the season, it sends an enormous message to the whole franchise, to him, to the players around him, to the locker room. Oh, yeah. It's like it is giving up on him, whether or not you say that from the podium or do whatever massage it how you want to. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and to back you up on the point about the Jaguars secondary, I just noticed this. I knew they were bad, but this number is jarring to me. They've allowed 10 touchdown passes and they have 0 interceptions. So opposing quarterbacks this season have a combined quarterback rating of 111.7. Joe Flacco today was 121.3. So you could say Joe Flacco, based on the season statistics, was slightly above average today. That's not a reason to make a quarterback change, being slightly above average against the
Jaguars. One to throw away from me. I'm having trouble with this one right now because there's a lot of stuff I'm rolling through and then discarding. Felt like this was more of a game where a lot of stuff cemented itself for me. Mm-hmm. This is tough. Oh, how about this? This team isn't going to give up big punt returns all season. That's a simple one. I just can't think of anything else. Ashton Dillon and Rigoberto Sanchez are too good of a team to give up 53-yard punt returns It's just not going to happen the whole rest of the season. That's not satisfying. I don't have much in the way of stuff from this game that I think is a narrative that's not necessarily true. That brings us to one to go on. The last thing here, this is the thing that you think we're going to be talking about the whole season. This defense is bad. Bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. Your point about the schedule is really good. They have played bad offenses so far. Guys are already hurt. They're going to keep getting hurt. Jalen Jones is kind of a wild ride at corner. he looks like a second-year corner, which here's the thing. Like, if you had a true number one plus Kenny Moore out there and then Jalen Jones, that's maybe not the worst thing in the world. You feel like you've got a developing starter because he had a couple nice plays today. Sam Womack, I think Sam Womack maybe should be on the field more. I don't know how healthy he was today with the illness. It seems like every time I notice him, it's for doing something good. It's not the case for other people who are number 21. But this defense, it's 419.2 yards so far per game. It's bad.
Yeah.
What if they have an injury at linebacker? Like Jalen Carlisle looks like a guy who can develop into a player and can help them. Like, he made one play. When he's in coverage, you see it with him, where he can run stuff down that I think other linebackers wouldn't get to. But, like, I don't think he's ready to play full snaps. Like, what happens if EJ Speed goes down? What happens if Zaire Franklin goes down? That's another huge drop-off at a depth position where they could have done more at some point.
Or what if Grover Stewart gets hurt? And we've seen what that does to the run defense. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like this. I'm going to double up on that because that's just my biggest takeaway was, like, this defense is so far gone at the moment in its current state. And I think the only hope with that side of the ball right now is that you can survive it for a couple weeks against some more bad offenses. So they survived the Bears and they survived the Steelers. Can they survive the Titans and can they survive the Dolphins? And if they can do that, then they can get some guys back like Jonathan Taylor to help bolster the offense. Get DeForest Buckner back eventually. I mean, some of these guys are going to be out a while, though. Tyquan Lewis is out a while. But get Kwity Paye back. It can get to a point where you have certain playmakers out there who can make some plays to offset the ones they're giving up. Like whenever DeForest Buckner gets back out there, I think when Kwity Paye's there, it could unlock Laiatu Latu a bit. He's getting a little bit too much attention for a rookie this early in his career. But they're going to give up plays. That's what, like I said, Jalen Jones is a wild ride. I think Nick Cross is starting to be a little bit of a wild ride where he can make some great plays like that interception on Trevor Lawrence. That was one of the rare times they've actually forced Trevor Lawrence into a mistake.
Totally forgot that happened on those two planes. Totally forgot.
Yeah. And yet, like, shortly after that, he was also one of the guys who got run over by Tate Bigsby for the demoralizing touchdown. So it's young players, young secondary players especially. They'll make some plays, you hope, like Jalen Jones forced the fumble. They're also going to give up some pretty disastrous plays. And, yeah, there's other positions. Like, you may get some of these guys back. They're not going to be at a point, though, where they have every single player available. And even if they did, I think at best they're probably an average defense. But they may get back some of these guys and then, like you said, lose a linebacker or lose Grover Stewart or something that all of a sudden exposes a different leak in it. So their hope right now is survive for a couple weeks. And then the offense is just going to have to kick it into gear once it gets Jonathan Taylor back, Anthony Richardson back, build on some of this stuff and get the defense to at least something other than 32nd in the league. But it's everything that we laid out this offseason is going on with this defense. And I don't know, Justin Simmons isn't walking through that door this week, I don't think. So I don't think there's going to be a big fix to it.
Nope, because he plays for the Falcons. I think when I pick my games, we're just full disclosure, I don't put a whole lot of effort into like trying to actually figure out who's going to win games when we're doing it in especially like mine. I think I did first in May, but I had a lot of shootouts like today in it because at the time I didn't believe the defense was going to be any good, and here we are, 5 games into the season. The defense is not any good. Yeah.
To be honest with you, that's like you're talking about like a lot of today was cemented things for you. George Bremer, who's also on the beat, brought this up, so I'll credit him for it. But this team does look today like we expected the Colts to look like this season, which was, they're going to get some explosive plays. They'll do some cool things on offense. They'll do some tricky things on offense. But ultimately, they're chasing points in a crazy way, and depth concerns and secondary problems galore. I think the one thing that you hope for that can change, the one thing that I did expect to see that's just not out there today was the run game element with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. I think that has got to be, if you're looking for kind of a hopeful sign that how can we not have every game be this game, it's that you can get even more explosive on offense. And maybe that run game gets to a point where it keeps the defense off the field more, because that did, contribute a little bit to the issues in the middle of the game. But for the most part, this is who the Colts are, which is, and at times explosive offense, and at times, developing, going to make some mistakes, not perfect, but they're interesting. Defense, they're trying to survive, and that's just sort of the model that they laid out by running back that same team they had last year that was kind of trending in this direction.
That's it for the Colts Cover 2 podcast, First Impressions Edition, brought to you by the cities of Jacksonville, Atlanta, and Indianapolis. I think you all know how I would rank those cities, the reverse of the way I just said it. I'd throw in some other cities that aren't even on that list, like Valdosta and La Crosse and Topeka. I don't even think I've ever been to Topeka, and I just assume it's better than Jacksonville. But it's over now. I don't have to go back.
That's how the podcast got better from the start here. It's just been a progression from Jacksonville back to Indy, and now we're at the best part of the show.
And I'm back. I don't have to go back unless the Colts somehow have to go to Jacksonville to play a playoff game. I don't think that's coming for Jacksonville, but I don't think this one's turning it around for them. So I'm free for another year. You all are free for another year. The Colts, most importantly, are free for another year from the horrors of that city. For the IndyStar, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. This has been your First Impressions podcast. We're going to go home and get some sleep.